Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this one-hour broadcast is World Watchers. It's program number 763, July 21st, 1986. I'm getting calls and letters from all over the country from various persons who are receiving cassettes that are taken off the air of these programs, which you're supposed to do. Tape them and copy them and send to relatives and people that you think or would be interested in these particular matters, friends or political people or writers or whatever. But they don't get the source information, the printed sheet that accompanies the broadcast, which is available to that person who is taping it, who originally tapes it. Write to me, Mae Brussell, Brussell, P.O. Box 22511, Carmel, California, 93922. Now tell me which tape you have, or put on the envelope any 4 broadcasts that you want, such as the month of July 1986 or June. I can't put more than 4 in one envelope, but write to me and I will send that sheet to you. And then when you make copies for other people, if you think this is important enough to make a copy and buy a cassette and mail it, then it's also important enough to put 22-cent stamp on an envelope and get 4 bibliography sheets. Copy those at the library or the post office in various places where they have copying machines. And with every tape, just send out this printed sheet that I make up for you so that the recipient of this information, including yourselves who are listening and taping, will have a regular bibliography sheet that you can put in chronological order in a 3-hole notebook. And it's very nice to read the sequence of events and follow what I'm saying, because today will be the past, and as we live tomorrow, you can go back and go through these sheets and just see how interesting this material is and how pertinent it is to those things that are going to happen in the future. Now, one quick comment to begin the program with. I read in the San Francisco Chronicle today that in celebration of, not a celebration, remembrance of the death of Elvis Presley, this will be the 9th year, and next year there'll be a large remembrance on the 10th anniversary of his death. The manager from Graceland, Todd Morgan, said that they're going to have, they're contemplating having a very large event, and at that time they will have 200 dancing Statue of Liberty imitators. I thought that was great because I visualized at the time that David Wolper put on this horrendous show for the 4th of July that having 200 Elvis Presleys, we'd soon have 1,000 John Lennons and 200 Janis Joplins, and they would take all the murdered musicians and have these massive displays of grossness. So I think it's very funny that the Graceland might have 200 Statue of Liberty imitators for their particular remembrance in a year. There was an article in the paper this morning about the Pope ordering Mass in Chihuahua, Mexico. The Catholic bishops there and the church were going to call off Mass to cancel Sunday Mass because of a protest of election fraud. Now, what the Catholic bishops want, and they shouldn't be interfering into the government of Mexico, is that they want the recounting of the electoral votes where the PRI party won the last election, and they're pushing for the PAN party, the National Action Party, and the candidate Francisco Barrio, and they claim the elections are fraudulent. And you may be wondering why the United States government is getting into the Mexican election frauds when you think of how John Kennedy won in 1960 and was murdered, and Robert Kennedy would have been the candidate in 1968, and he was murdered, and Ted Kennedy was delivered this Chappaquiddick affair so that he was wiped out as a candidate, and Natalie Stevenson died under mysterious circumstances very quickly after having been with people from the CIA in London, and Senator Frank Church, a candidate for the Democratic Party, had a premature cancer and died, as did Hubert Humphrey, another potential candidate. This country is a disaster in terms of wiping out our electoral possibilities, and even George Wallace was shot just on the eve of his primary victory running against Richard Nixon. The Mexican government has had a rule or law that has been upheld for 60 years, that the church should not interfere with the voting process, that the clergy should not criticize the government, should not participate in laws or officials in public or private in the politics. This is the first time in 60 years that they wanted to cancel the Mass this Sunday, and the clergy demand a recount because they are pushing for the PAN party. Now, there was a press conference in Mexico just this last March where there were allegations that Senator Jesse Helms, was trying to destabilize the Mexican government, that he was working with our State Department, and that they are singling out the Mexican government because they don't want to put their oil money to pay their national debt. Mexico has a $15 billion a year need to put money into the system to let the people live. They are starving. There's 40 million reaching starvation levels right now. Mexico owes $72 billion in debt to largely the banks of America, and by paying this tremendous interest rate, they'd have no money to take care of their own people. And this press conference in Mexico singled out Henry Kissinger, former National Security Council member Norman Bailey, former CIA Director William Colby, who are pushing for a fake democratization. That's what the press conference said. They're saying they want a democracy in Mexico, but they really want the PAN party, which is a fascist party identified with Nazis from World War II and Nazis after World War II. The PAN, the National Action Party, is a fascist organization, and the priests in Mexico and William Colby, former CIA director, and Henry Kissinger and George Shultz are pushing, and Senator Jesse Helms, of course, pushing for a recount on the hopes that they can put a member of the fascist party into power, which they wanted for a long time. The Vatican has interfered into fascist politics in many countries, and the Pope is allowing the bishops and the Vatican officials to take part, but he quickly said he did not want the Mass canceled. And so in that sense, he separated himself from that, but the conflicts are still going on. I've been noticing for a long, long time obituaries of very young people, and it seems to be escalating. And I'm asking you, world watchers who live in various cities, not close by here, because I take the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner and LA Times and the Herald, but outside the California area, to read your obituaries in various states where you live and receive these tapes, and cut out those deaths of young persons, 50 or younger, some of them 60 years of age, and see what they were doing at the time and how they died, and date them and put the newspaper on the corner, and maybe at the end of the month, each month, send me the obituary so I can see what they are. There was an obituary June 3rd in the New York Times of William Damsby, D-A-M-S-B-Y. He had a very versatile acting career. He had a good voice, a baritone with the New York Opera. He died of pneumonia at age 44, and the obituary tells about his working with the New York Opera and playing the role of Judge Turpin in Sweeney Todd, which was interesting because of other actors working with Stephen Sondheim who have died, and he was in well-known operas, but 44 years old, and he died of pneumonia. The reason I bring it up is this morning in the San Francisco Chronicle, there's a Robert M. Cover, 42 years old, Yale University law professor, longtime civil rights leader, died of a heart attack. A member of the Yale faculty club, he refused to take his bar examination until the loyalty oath was taken out of that. He challenged it in court. He's a member of the New York bar and teaches at Yale University. He spent 3 weeks in jail in Albany, Georgia. He went there to work for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and worked for voting rights in the South. 42 years old, heart attack. And then next to that, just today in the San Francisco Chronicle, July 21st, Alfred Luongo, 65, Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, died Saturday. He was appointed to the bench by President John Kennedy in 1961. He was installed as Chief Judge in 1982. Now, I wonder if this presidential appointee is making way for Ronald Reagan's appointments to the courts. He has a good hunk, 40% of all the federal courts to still appoint while he has 2 more years in office. The Washington Times had an obituary of Thomas Zacher, 54 years old. He died of cancer. He had a master's degree, a doctor's degree. He trained at the Illinois Institute of Technology. He worked in the Defense Department since 1970 and worked on research in the Defense Department. Another person, Stephen Reichenberg, died last week, or in June rather, 36 years old. Former legislative analyst for the Montgomery County Council, a former budget director of Washington, D.C. City Council. He worked in Washington, D.C., a bachelor and master's degree, Pratt Institute, and he worked on economic and fiscal matters in Washington, D.C., dead at 36. And just one more as an example, Sandra White, former flight attendant, former American airline attendant, died of kidney and liver ailments, 42 years old. She's got an award from the Fairfax County Police Department for superior community service and public safety at 42. There's a 42, a 36, a 54, another 42, a 65, and another 44. And it just seems that these people would have, with their positions of a BA, MA, PhD, and city government, would have access to good medical care. And I find, and I haven't done a whole broadcast on it, but every day I'm finding a lot of people doing a lot of good things, and their obituary seems to say that they were too young to die. And of course, we'll never know the circumstances, but I think it would be interesting for you to start reading the paper in those terms. Now, speaking of dying, G. Gordon Liddy, formerly of the FBI, a district attorney prosecutor in upstate New York, who worked for the Drug Enforcement Agency, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm, a defendant in the Watergate case, has now opened up his own agency for what he calls security. It's called the Hurricane Force. Many of you probably read it in the newspapers and Time magazine. One article says terrorism can work both ways. If you want to put out a hit list on selected terrorists, and terrorists, of course, by their definition, it could be a civil rights worker, you know. If you want a hit list, go to G. Gordon Liddy. He now has a 10-man strike force of commandos who will serve your needs. We talk about the security firm of G. Gordon Liddy and Associates and its Hurricane Force, the only private anti-terrorist team that we can think of offhand. They'll work overseas or on domestic turf. This multinational A-team will deliver ransoms, rescue kidnapped corporate officers, coach executives, snoop around new neighborhoods, and check the background of your neighbors. The fee for this excitement is roughly $500,000. He'll throw the boys into work with his simple terrorist capers. But the price goes up with the risks to the James Bond team when he has to call in special equipment and handle those problems. Liddy says American businesses are operating all over the world and there is a terrorism problem. And then the article concludes, get ready. His brochure advises, or get even. Now, another article on G. Gordon Liddy's new security school tells about the 10 people that have signed up in Miami for it. And there's a quotation of Liddy. We had to turn down numerous people who applied because they had previous criminal records. Well, this is a spokesman for Liddy. We wouldn't want a criminal type who could use this knowledge to their advantage. Now, G. Gordon Liddy was a criminal type. He served 6 years in jail and bragged about his efforts or willingness to kill people, so we don't know if he did or has, and was absorbed with Gestapo pictures and Nazi memorabilia and German techniques. So he has opened up the Academy of Corporate Security and Private Investigation, and he already has 10 people ready to go. Time magazine explained that along with his work, he has some trainers, some Israeli people or officials working for him, and out of Miami, he'll have surveillance systems, a 10-man Israeli commando team, and 2 ex-British commandos. More than 20 would-be sleuths have applied so far for the Miami course. They're learning how to serve him, and they could be runaway people of the CIA because G. Gordon Liddy worked for the Central Intelligence Agency and under the Howard Hughes organization that set up hit teams and death squads with Robert Mayu as the cover for the Hughes organization. Just 2 weeks ago, on June 30th, that was the World Watchers program number 760, I was talking about the deaths of people such as Roberto Clemente, the baseball star who was killed in an airplane crash, Don Rogers, football player, Len Bias, the baseball player, the multiple murders in Huntsville prison in Texas, the hanging of Jacqueline Peters, of Timothy Lee, the murder of Faye Stender, and the relationship of killing blacks and faced ender, in this case being a white who is helping blacks. And I also cited, and it's on that biblio sheet, an article called The White Hand that was printed in Penthouse, how over 1,000 CIA trained killers have formed their own Murder Incorporated. Now that's exactly what G. Gordon Liddy is. He's making it legal at this time in the United States of America, advertising hit teams and getting even. And he has this notorious record to fascism and access to all the federal government secrets, and he can be down there in Miami directing this. And this article that was written, The White Hand by Ernest Volkman and John Cummings, talks about renegade CIA, and this is a perfect example. As I say, had on the air June 30th, and July 3rd, just 4 days later, out comes the article of G. Gordon Liddy's hit team who will help you get even. Now, as soon as Ronald Reagan was in office, well, within 10 months of when he was president, there was an article worldwide was covered throughout the world. One I'm citing is Washington Post, November 19th, 1981. A worldwide private CIA service is planned. U.S. publisher Anthony Stout, backed by large European financial institutions, is building a worldwide intelligence service. It'll be for business and government. It will rival the capabilities of the CIA. The initials for this institute are IRIS. It will be based in the Virginia suburbs. Now, this institute must be 5 years old, and here is G. Gordon Liddy opening up what he calls his own team, but has access to these computers, having been part of the Central Intelligence Agency. The purpose of having it in the United States is that they can be protected through the First Amendment and don't have to discuss their clients and so forth, which they might have to do overseas. They would be throughout the world. They have 33 analysts, which they have now. As I say, this was 5 years ago, under the State Department, and the headquarters are in Arlington, Virginia, of course. So this is a private spy agency, and one of the people putting it together was former British Prime Minister Edward Heath, and he will get a salary, or does, of $100,000 to head this International Advisory Committee, which has information on anybody. So if you go to G. Gordon Liddy and want to know who your neighbors are, then the super spy agency, which is as large as the Central Intelligence Agency, it has computer capabilities, it will be electronic, it will be instantaneous, and they can give this information out for people. They have members from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East, United States, and Western Europe, and they will have their own agency, which you call a private, like the Howard Hughes Organization is private, or Hughes Medical Institute, and it's hard to tap into them because of the way it's set up as being a private agency. This is a example of how G. Gordon Liddy can get his information and serve these people who pay $200,000 or $300,000 for that information. Now, this past week there was an article in the Los Angeles Times, London TV program to feature mock Lee Harvey Oswald trial. There were a group of researchers that put together a play a while back, and now it's coming to London. So it's 23 years since the murder of John Kennedy. The subject is hardly over, and now this play is going to be produced in London, and the London Weekend Television has been negotiating for people to arrange this show, and they want some of the witnesses who testified for the Warren Commission also to help them make the program even more interesting. Oswald will be represented by an empty chair. He was never tried. He was shot 2 days after his arrest, and the program is a documentary exercise, not a dramatized reconstruction of how his interests were not presented in trying to say he was the one who killed John Kennedy. A program in San Francisco called People Are Talking had a 1-hour broadcast. It's an ABC station, July the 11th, this past week, and Paul Schrade, who was shot in the Ambassador Hotel the night Robert Kennedy was killed, had put this program on in San Francisco, and it's about exposing the conspiracy behind the murder of Robert Kennedy. The Los Angeles Times is covering a 3-part series this week on the conspiracy behind the murder of Robert Kennedy. So London is playing the mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. The establishment media is having an interview on the murder of Robert Kennedy. The certainly establishment Los Angeles Times is reopening the case of Robert Kennedy for 3 consecutive days. So these matters are very, very important, and it's nice that they're coming back to a whole new generation to bring out questions that then they can study and analyze and see how our elections were interfered with. Forget Mexico, if you can, and the accusations that they have inaccurate elections, and think about what's happened to this country and realize that the overthrow of our electoral system is still being examined by writers, historians, and the media, British television, American television, whatever you want. Not enough of it yet, but it could keep developing. I want to just update a few items that have to do with the shootout in Beverly Hills, California, where Mr. Skinner, Hugh Skinner, was murdered by the LAPD, and his 2 hostages were killed also. 3 people were killed outside the Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry store. I did some of that a few weeks ago on this program. I just want to cite 3 current articles to update that. $2.5 million in claims filed in jeweler's death. Claims against Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors and the City of Beverly Hills have been filed for the family and heirs of Hugh Skinner, the manager of the jewelry store. The case is being handled by San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli at behest of Skinner's nephew, Carl Skinner, and his nieces. The reason I chuckle is that Melvin Belli came in when the attorneys for Lee Harvey Oswald's assassin, Jack Ruby, were decided to be not acceptable by the CIA and the federal government, and Melvin Belli became the gentleman who, in quotes, represented Jack Ruby, who was given a full sentence that he tried to appeal and then died before it could be appealed, a death sentence for killing Lee Harvey Oswald. And Melvin Belli steps in when there's a tragedy at Bhopal, when the Korean airline went down. He is very much a person who works on government-related murders and takes a very weird side, but enters into them to help prosecute or the defendant or whatever. So as soon as this the series of murders took place in Los Angeles, and I believe it was more than people are saying, and as soon as Mr. Levadetus was arrested and the police killed the manager of the store, Mr. Skinner, in comes Melvin Belli, which is typical. One interesting article from the LA Times regarding the Levadetus case, because all the quotations about him personally come from the military, a member or members of the United States military, and as I said before, there was a stance and a manner in the killing that suggested military training, just as Mark David Chapman appeared to have military training when he killed John Lennon. The Los Angeles Times begins their story, Levadetus, a risk taker, a failure at jobs. That's what we heard about James Earl Ray, and found out then he was linked to the Klan and the Nazis and the Mafia, and Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby and all the alleged assassins, these loners. These adjectives come in that are a clue. So the article begins, he was a risk taker, a failure at jobs. Stephen Levadetus was a Brooklyn-born Las Vegas kid who couldn't hold a steady job, and he turned with increasing frequency to his older brother, dourly called hustling, and the police called it a crime. He took progressive risks. He often did his acts colored with immaturity. Levadetus came to a tragic conclusion in Beverly Hills on Rodeo Drive, which seemed kind of flaky. That's a quote. This was the recollection of a military officer who dealt frequently with him after the suspect left New York in late 82 and at age 18 settled in Nevada. A military officer dealt frequently with him from 1982 to 1986. And this article goes on about his arrest and his entering another jewelry store and taping the people up and sporting a neat mustache and a full beard and his polyester suit and his reptile skin shoes and his appearance in Beverly Hills. And but the point is that the person giving the interview about his character is a member of the military. It goes on, at age 18, Levadetus joined the Army Reserve, a step young people take to acquire Army training and to supplement their incomes. After he finished his basic training and his advanced training in Army Reserve, he was in Nevada and he was transferred to a combat support hospital in Las Vegas. Now, the hospital is where the mind control and programming could be, because from Brooklyn he goes to Vegas and begins with his military people who were with him from 1982 to 86 in a military hospital. Within a year, he was terminated from his active status, which reminds me of Oswald being terminated when he went to the Soviet Union officially. He had very poor attendance, according to the Army official, who spoke on the condition he not be identified. The source said that while most of the young Army reservists are well motivated, Leviticus exhibited an unusually irresponsible attitude about fulfilling his commitment. A 6-foot-tall man who got along pretty well with his peers, no unusual aggressiveness, significant financial problems. Once, on occasion, the Army official said, "He came to see me about a late paycheck." This man who worked with Leviticus also was evidently in charge of his money and keeping track of him from 82 to 86. The check was less than $100. He was upset. He was about to burst into tears. And then it goes on, during last May, he lived in an apartment in East Fremont Street, which cuts through the Las Vegas downtown casino district. He had worked as a room service waiter, when you love him as your waiter, other jobs at Las Vegas strip hotels between 1981 and 84, and he was also a cab driver. Now, what the other jobs are, or like Candy Jones, he was sent from the military hospital to test him on other jobs. They're not specific, but the quotations are from the military. And then there's a quotation from his brother, who said that he wondered if he would have to change his last name to protect his import business. Now, one final article on Leviticus from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, June 25th. When Leviticus was bussed in Las Vegas, his mother, a real traditional old Greek lady, flew out from New York to see him. She is, the mother was secretary at a Greek Orthodox church near the little Las Vegas motel where Leviticus' mother stayed. This is a quotation of Patsy Molina, secretary at a Greek Orthodox church. Now, the Greek Orthodox Church brought Palestinians and Muslim family and made them part of the Greek Orthodox Church, known as the Sirhan family, and moved them from Palestine, when it became Israel, to New York and to Pasadena, and the rest is history. They were brought into that area by friends of Richard Nixon through the Greek Orthodox Church. Marina Oswald's funding, her money, her associations in Dallas, the taking care of the birth of her second child, feeding the first one, and taking care of her while Oswald was on his various jobs and missions, was the Greek Orthodox Church. So a lady in Las Vegas, Patsy Molina, secretary to Greek Orthodox Church, was describing Leviticus's mother. Now, his mother, it divides her time between New York and Athens, Greece. She was stunned to learn that her boy had his first brush with the law in Las Vegas. He had come to Vegas in 82, was working with the Army, and then it goes on to say that he was arrested for stealing computers, and then it appears 1984 he burglarized 2 computer stores. In the burglaries, about $40,000 in merchandise was taken. He pleaded guilty to possessing stolen goods. He was given the 5 years of suspended sentence I mentioned before. Later, in July 1985, he was again arrested, possession of drugs with intent to sell. He wasn't prosecuted on the cocaine charges because there was more than one person involved, and they let him go. 2 months later, the police arrested Leviticus for firing a gun into an occupied building. The charges were dismissed for lack of evidence by the Deputy Chief of Police of Nevada and the Department of Parole and Probation. Last November 8th, the state parole and probation officers picked him up for violation of parole. A parole revocation hearing was set for January 23rd. He disappeared and didn't show up, and his name he wasn't sought for. He was still in Vegas. They also had another burglary that they suspected he did in a jewelry store. February 2nd of 1986, there was a daring robbery, daytime robbery, where people were locked up, tied up. He escaped with $250,000 in jewelry, and less than a month later, the police suspected it was him, and there were warrants out on 5 counts of robbery, deadly weapon, coercion with a deadly weapon, and he was not brought in. He was living right in Las Vegas in what they call Glitter Gulch, among the casinos and so forth, and then moved to Los Angeles, where he had a $600 a month apartment, and he had no verifiable employment history when he was in Los Angeles, and he was picked up on Rodeo Drive with a 1971 Plymouth with Nevada plates on Rodeo Drive, May 19th, before the shootout, and the police let him go. They could have put a search and found the cocaine charges, the robbery charges, the jewelry store, allegations, the computer stuff that was sold. He had a long record in Las Vegas, and a man who was close to him. The only person giving any interview was the secretary of the Greek Orthodox Church or the army spokesman who was in contact with him and his money and knew that he was at an army hospital in Las Vegas. So much for that account of the burglary murder in Beverly Hills, that I believe he went specifically to get Mr. Skinner or produce him, and the SWAT team killed him, and Nancy Reagan, as I had on the year before, stayed at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel across the street 1 block away from where all this was happening. I'll take a 1-minute break now and update some other news for you, just as bad, but I hope interesting. This is Mae Brussell, and we'll continue in 1 minute. This is Mae Brussell, the second half of broadcast number 763. I mentioned that the celebration for the Statue of Liberty began with the Eagle leading the way and other tall ships and small ships behind it. There was a letter to the letters to the editor in the New York Times. It was written by Peter Stanford, president of the National Maritime Historical Society, and he writes, "Let the Esmeralda sail in liberty," and he explains that even though the Esmeralda was a prison ship used by Chile at the time of the overthrow of the government, that there are other examples that could shed light on the principle involved. Then he says the Eagle, the U.S. Coast Guard's own ship, was launched by Adolf Hitler and named for the street thug Horst Wessel. We neither deny nor condone that background. We rejoice that the ship sails in freedom to good purposes today. Then, to top off some of the small articles about Hitler's ship, the Washington Times has a way, there's a term for it, of exaggerated stories or cartoons, a full 3/4 of a whole page with these ghastly cartoons. The Washington Times is owned by Reverend Moon, and its editor, Arnaud de Borchgrave, has been linked with the intelligence community for many, many years into counterintelligence and covert action. And good, as sure as you would believe, the Washington Times had not 1 page, but 2 full pages of newsprint, if you can believe the size, with a picture of these great big blue sails. And 1 page is called Soaring with the Eagle by Jim Watson, and it's, as I say, 1 whole page, another whole page of this ship. And Jim Watson says the Eagle is a bark. That's a term for a craft that has 3 masts but uses square sails on only 2 of them. Commissioned by Hitler in 1936, the 290-foot Horst Wessel became the property of the United States. It commissioned by Hitler in 1936, became the property of the United States in 1946, a prize of war. She was renamed the Eagle, and the swastika on her bow was replaced by a carved wooden eagle. Now a seagoing classroom for Coast Guard cadets, Eagle is America's most famous showboat, a floating ambassador of goodwill, a recruiting tool for the United States Coast Guard. On her way from the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut, Eagle's first stop will be Washington to help the swearing in of the Coast Guard's new commandant, Admiral Paul Yost, and for some activities promoting the Potomac River Fest. The 3rd celebration of the waterfront opens tomorrow. After a week's visit, Eagle will set sail for Bermuda, her next port of call, Norfolk, Virginia. There, she will be host for the Ship in Operation Sail 1986, and on July the 4th, the Eagle will lead all the other ships in this celebration for the international flotilla of 20 or more tall ships. Now, I bring this up because of who publishes this newspaper, these huge color pictures of it, and how open they are of this prize of America. As I said before on another broadcast, if America defeated Hitler and we went across the ocean to do that fact, we could make our own ship, and the pride of America should be American-made. There is symbolism here that the in-team gives with each other and the masses lose the point. And this source of pride and of breaking in new people in the Coast Guard and training them there on Adolf Hitler's ship is not lost among those people. And I really believe that that ship should be turned in and destroyed and put away, and America build its own ship before it builds a space shuttle for $2 billion and have the pride of America be American and not having been made by Adolf Hitler. Now, I want to talk a bit about terrorism, the rest of this broadcast, almost all of it. The People's Daily World had an article June 20th, 1986. For those of you who follow World Watchers or David Emery's program in Nip Tuck, One Step Beyond, this will seem almost comical. The title of the little article is Neo-Fascists Blamed for Bomb. Neo-fascist terrorists and members of Italian military intelligence were responsible for the August 1980 bombing of the Bologna railroad terminal, in which 85 people were killed and 200 wounded. The Italian government made public their investigation of the case this week in Rome, including this conclusion: involved in the planning the powerful bomb were a score of known Italian neo-fascists. They were acting on orders of Licio Gelli, who attended Ronald Reagan's inauguration, nicknamed the Puppet Master, the head of a secret neo-fascist propaganda Dewey P2 conspiracy, which used as a cover for a Freemasons lodge. Also involved were General Pietro Musumeci, former Deputy Director of Italian Military Intelligence, the SISMI, SISMI, and Assistant Giuseppe Belmonte. Musumeci played a key role in getting Turkey neo-fascist Mehmet Ali to falsely charge Bulgaria with involvement in the 1981 attempted assassination. Now, it's interesting that they put in there that the Italian intelligence in this secret fascist organization played a key role in getting Agca to implicate the Bulgarians. But the title neo-fascist is they were outright Nazis. Licio Gelli was a member of the Waffen-SS, and if he was, he still is. And the people working with him, like Stefano, Delle, Chiaie, attend meetings and meet with people in the United States at the present time. He goes in and out of the United States and is creating the background for the terrorism that's taking place in Peru at the present time, and they work closely with Klaus Barbie. You can't call Joseph Mengele and Klaus Barbie and Licio Gelli neo-fascists. They are Nazis. They were, they are, and to believe this is a new organization that sprung up 40 years after World War II is really ridiculous. Now, an item about Hayden Lake, Idaho, where a avowed fascist resides. He had a press conference this past week. The title of the article is White Supremacists Gather to Establish a Homeland. Hayden Lake, Idaho. White supremacy leaders gathered yesterday. They have an annual meeting to create a Aryan Nations Congress to unite their effort for a whites-only homeland in the northeast of the United States. The white supremacist meeting is their first gathering in the northeast since the arrest of a group of the FBI investigations that led to December's racketeering conviction of 10 members of the order, a militant right-wing group blamed for 2 murders, more than $4 million in robberies, counterfeiting, and other crimes, and they haven't been charged with the murder of Alan Berg in Denver, Colorado, and they were all linked to that particular murder. What they don't say in this article, the People's World, is that, this is the Los Angeles Herald that printed this one, the LA Herald. They don't say that Richard Butler, who is the minister under the guise of religion, who heads the Aryan Nations and the Order up in Idaho, that wants the white statehood of these various northwestern areas, that he was an engineer at Lockheed, and that he worked with Thane Cesar, the man who murdered Robert Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel, who was moonlighting as a Lockheed security guard, and that Richard Butler worked with the U2 program that also incorporated Edwin Wilson and James McCord and all the top people who later surfaced at the time of Watergate and later. They want their own homeland, and at their annual meeting, they declared their intent, but they're not nuts or fanatics. They're tied to William Pierce, whose goal is to kill every Jew and black in the United States, and Pierce worked for United Technology, for United States Air Force, and Richard Butler for Lockheed. So this is our military looking like they are separate from the military as they're bringing out the idea that the whites have to be separate in this country. I'm not going to update the broadcast I did on the murder of Len Bias or Don Rogers this week. I'll do more next week or the week after, but interestingly enough, the LA Times had a story, June the 11th, source of poison cocaine sought, Salt Lake City. Narcotic officers are checking confiscated stocks of cocaine to trace the source of cocaine that is linked with cyanide. It has killed one drug user. It may be responsible for killing four others. Four others fell ill. Cocaine and cyanide were found in each of the 5 victims' bloodstreams, Lieutenant Bailey of Salt Lake City County Sheriff's Narcotics Division said. Now, one of the problems with cyanide is it doesn't always show up, and it affects the heart, that you have what is like an instant heart attack. So while they're investigating the deaths of Don Rogers and Len Bias, the problem of cyanide and cocaine is a possibility coming out of laboratories in Salt Lake City. And of course, Utah is one of the repositories of our German biological warfare systems. There was an article in the LA Times this past week. Drysdale, that's Lefty Drysdale, the basketball coach, faces grand jury investigation. Maryland's coach actions after Bias's death are under scrutiny, and they are looking into the fact of the connection of people high up and close to Len Bias who obstructed justice. The grand jury is looking into charges against Brian Tribble for supplying drugs. Tribble is a former Maryland student. He was a friend of Bias. He called an ambulance and was with him and then left, and the people who allegedly were his friends have all disappeared, and it's going to take court orders to get them to testify what happened and to try to get to the bottom of this particular untimely death. And then, of course, the family of Mr. Rogers claimed that there's no way that he could take the drugs, and they are questioning the coroner in Sacramento. Now, a widow stepped forward this week, which is very unusual. The widow of Michael J. Smith, the pilot for the Challenger, and she's filed a $15.1 million wrongful death suit against NASA and against the former rocket manager Lawrence B. Mulloy, M-U-L-L-O-Y. The LA Times story, and of course it was syndicated on the Wire service and was on TV. NASA spokesman Dave Garnett said the claim was received July 3rd at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, which is directly where the responsibility should be. The claim, a copy of which was released by the space agency, said Smith was thrown about in the spacecraft in the few seconds preceding his death, would know of his impending death. NASA has the secret transcripts, they're keeping them secret, whereby they say they didn't know they were going to die, even though they're floating in the air and dropping 10 miles down into the ocean. They're not supposed to know they're dying, and they know they didn't know, but they won't let you see the transcripts or hear them, so forth. And she says that they had to know their impending death. The claim alleged negligence of NASA employees, that this was the sole proximate cause of Smith's death. The claim said the NASA officials included Mr. Mulloy, who knew or should have known that the booster rocket joint seal that failed would not properly seal and that a catastrophic accident would likely occur. The officials should and knew that the cold weather could contribute to the seal failure. Now, this same Jane Smith, a month earlier in June, was castigating NASA. She hadn't filed a suit yet. She praised Alan J. McDonald and Roger Borchgrave of Morton Thiokol of standing up to the fact that the Challenger would be affected by the cold temperatures, and they were worried about the booster joints. And then within 1 month of the time, she decided to sue NASA. And she described in this article in June one of her daughters crying when she saw this shuttle fall into the sea. And she said, "Daddy, you always promised nothing would happen." So now this is a widow taking actions. Corazon Aquino, I hope, will take actions against the murder of her husband in the Philippines. Mrs. Buto is continually acting at risk of her life, and her brother's been killed in Pakistan, to illustrate the problem of how her father was murdered. The sons of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg can keep continuing the investigation of the death of their parents, the electrocution of their parents, charged with passing nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. And Mrs. Bruno Hauptmann, the widow of the man who got the electric chair in New Jersey for killing the Lindbergh child, is pursuing with new evidence, and an attorney from San Francisco just this week filed a new suit because she claims the New Jersey officials lied, and that a German fellow who was in New Jersey who worked with Bruno Hauptmann left this money, the ransom money, in their garage and went on to Germany and then died, and Bruno Hauptmann was left with this money in his garage and was charged with murdering the Lindbergh child. Now, that whole episode, which happened in 1932, was very political because it turned Charles Lindbergh against the United States, and he became very sympathetic to Hitler, and he moved to England, he and his wife, and were going to move to Germany. And they were close to Goering and Goebbels and the German hierarchy, and he turned his back on America after the son was killed. And in order to get that mindset to turn him, the murder of his child in New Jersey, just when they had moved into a new home and had so much future in that home, was a turning point in the mind of Charles Lindbergh about America. He was sympathetic to the fascist cause anyway, but this act happening to him in this country caused him to lean more to Nazi Germany, which he did, and the murder triggered off those actions that he followed with later. I did several broadcasts on the fact that I believe Chernobyl was a disaster planned to embarrass the Soviet Union, that it was sabotaged and the information was delayed to Mr. Gorbachev so that Radio Free America could tell the Eastern Europeans and those in the Soviet Union that we cared more for them than their leaders, and I went into detail many of the implications of why I believe it was sabotaged. If you want those back broadcasts, they are available. The Monterey Herald today and the Wire Service had a story. Soviets on Sunday read the Politburo report on the extensive political, economic, and human costs at Chernobyl disaster. They want punishment for the people who did it. They're very open about what happened. And a military officer said if the death penalty is possible, that would be okay. Instead of being secretive about an accident the Soviet Union was responsible for a change, they're very open with foreigners. And this article said they're sharing with them their anger and frustration. There was another article printed on Sunday, July 20th, USSR to try key Chernobyl plant officials. They've been charged with gross negligence, bad errors, shortcomings, testing parts of the nuclear plant that were not safe. And this article mentions these particular people: a deputy minister of power and an electrician, another deputy director of the institute that designed the reactor. They fired one gentleman by the name of Meshkov. One had disappeared and left the premises. I don't know where he traveled or how. And I was suspicious of a death right after that of a military person who was recruited in the Ukraine in 1943 and would have access to the facilities and be knowledgeable about that there. So the Soviet Union is angry, and they're not letting this thing rest. Now, going down to Brazil to update the Mengele story, I was very surprised to read in the Associated Press, July 8th, Brazil police charge 4 who harbored Mengele. The police have made criminal charges against 4 people, and this is interesting. They have arrested or charged Giza and Gita Stammer, Austrian immigrants, and Wolfram and Lissolette Bossert, because they lied to authorities and harbored an illegal alien. Now, it's really amazing that they would bring this out, that these 2 harbored, not that possibly the Bosserts buried a person that wasn't Mengele, but that they housed Mengele. If convicted, they could be sentenced up to 4 years in prison. The case is now in the hands of a federal prosecutor. And it goes on to say how the grave in San Paulo was dug up and that it was Joseph Mengele who died while he was swimming with the Bosserts. Now, an interesting fact that should be investigated, and I'll pursue it if I can, is that at the time the body was dug up and all this publicity was going, Giza Stammer, the husband of Gita, had left, and he was on a merchant marine ship going to the Philippines and Japan, and I believe that he could have Joseph Mengele on that ship leaving the country. He and his son were officials of the merchant marine activities going out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, so there would be no way ever to find Mengele if he was with them. So maybe by charging him for this minor charge of having harbored Mengele, the whole thing about helping Mengele escape or drowning a person, a different person, won't even be brought up. 4 years isn't very much, and they got a lot of fame and money and support, and the Stammers got property and ranch from the Mengele family. But I was interested in the fact that this came up. Another article about the Mengele family says that the state of Bavaria used public funds of Germany to bail out a company that was starting to go bankrupt. They make agricultural machinery. It's run by the relatives of Joseph Mengele. The Mengele family firm specializes in agricultural machinery and is the largest of its kind in Europe. Their business amounted to $110 million in 1984. However, they suffered losses, and this is interesting, because the effect of some European community foreign policy decisions and the April 26 Soviet nuclear disaster at Chernobyl. Now, the Bavarian government, the state of Bavaria, is giving money to the Mengele family, to their farm equipment, based on the fact that they lost money at Chernobyl. Many of you regular World Watchers might share with me a conversation on what in the heck this means. The government of Bavaria said they were justified in giving the Mengele factory money because it involves the economy in Günzburg, where they employ 1,100 people in a town of 14,000. The bank has waived their demands on the farm. They have insufficient money so that the interest and the loans are forgiven. The company is in the hands of 3 generations of Joseph Mengele, headed by Mengele's nephews, Karl Heinz Mengele and Dieter Mengele. What it doesn't say is that Dieter Mengele owns tractors and equipment in Indiana, in the United States, and a friend, Brian Boland, who wrote a book on Mengele, has met with and seen Dieter Mengele in this country. In fact, he was afraid of his life. He and his co-worker are being killed by this particular character, and there were allegations that Mengele in 1970, after having died in 1969, was at the home of Dieter Mengele, upstate New York. So they're very active in the farm business, and how the Bavarian government is giving money to the Mengele farm tractors because of the incident at Chernobyl is something to really think around and play with. It is so very weird. Now, I want to go into terrorism in America as much time as I have, and obviously I'll have to do it, continue with it next week. But there was a small article in the Los Angeles Herald. 2 private school owners face trial for firebombing. And I don't know if it went over your wire services, but 2 teachers, Elizabeth Hamilton, 39, and Charlotte Wyckoff, 51, have to stand trial because they hired 4 mercenaries to firebomb 2 former teachers at their nursery schools. They have 5 nursery schools. The person who was arrested out there in Riverside, California, was Franklin Joseph Camper, who operates a survival and mercenary training school in Hueytown, Alabama, and his 2 assistants. One of them has fled, and they're looking for the other 2. Now, Franklin Camper is being arrested in San Bernardino County, being at the home of 2 people who he firebombed, is as horrendous and gigantic as James McCord, chief of security for the Committee to Re-elect the President and for the CIA, being caught at the Watergate Hotel. Another article from the LA Herald, 2 school owners accused, and this was just a few days later that this was printed, had a item about the chain of private elementary schools. You know, nobody is safe. Nursery schools, elementary schools, and the women who run them were arrested by the federal government because they operate Pacific Coast Preparatory Schools with 3 sites in San Bernardino and 1 in Orange County. This has 4 schools. Another article, 5 schools. San Bernardino, which is the area where Thane, Cesar, who shot Robert Kennedy, is allegedly one of the organizers of the Nazi Party. This is what I learned years ago. So another small article. Then the Monterey Herald, our own paper here, had a story, mercenary charged in bombings, in the picture of Franklin Camper and how he was jailed without bond after his arrest in Alabama, and it involved the California Learning Centers. And this is the article. It says 5 elementary and nursery schools. And Wall Street Journal even had a story. Camper is so important that it finally got into the Wall Street Journal, although I haven't seen it in New York Times or Washington Post. Mercenary group's chief accused of firebombing. Franklin Camper, director of the Mercenary Association, has been arrested and charged with blowing up 2 automobiles in California. They were actually homes that were bombed. The automobiles happened to be in the garage. All are charged with conspiracy, he and the 2 men, and one that has gotten away that they're trying to find, and would involve as long as 25 years in prison, but you know Franklin Camper isn't going to get that. Now, there was another long article in the Los Angeles Times, May 21st. Some of you could go to the library and get it, titled 5 Arrested in Firebombing of Cars. And that's what I want to share with you and do more this week and next week on Franklin Camper and the importance of Franklin Camper. But before I go into this long article, because it'll take the remainder of the time, I just want to tell you the backup. In the gist of this first story, Franklin Camper was hired by these 2 ladies who run these 5 schools to firebomb 2 homes because 2 women who worked for them left and were going to take it before the Labor Relations Board. And Camper personally came to California. I mean, he has this school to train mercenaries overseas, and here he is training people linked to Air India crash, to the murder attempt of Rajiv Gandhi, to the planned murder of Gandhi in Mexico in August of '86, to the bombs put on a Air Canada plane that goes to Japan, and it exploded in the airport in Tokyo. He's been linked to the Contras, the training of the Contras, and the soldiers of fortune, the mercenaries all over the world. But here he is domestically in the United States doing and he works for the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, doing himself something, and in that situation flying to California twice and doing it. What importance do these 2 particular teachers have with their 5 schools? Now, the main article, it came out, as I say, May 21st. Now, just this last week, July 18th, 1986, there was a story in the LA Times, mother accused of death plot against her daughter. And the gist of this story is that Mrs. Wyckoff has been charged by the grand jury in Los Angeles of attempting to hire somebody to murder her daughter, who's the sole witness against Franklin Camper, to protect Camper, an agent of the FBI, and as I say, working with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. She wants to protect Camper, and her daughter is the sole witness because Camper's airplane tickets to California and the rented car and hotel and so forth was paid in cash. And the woman who saw Camper and knew about it, her daughter, gave testimony for the original indictment. So just this past week, the mother who hired the mercenaries to firebomb the former teachers, her daughter has, Shirley Wright, 28 years old, has been protected, and the story is that the mother was arranging to have the daughter murdered so that Franklin Camper and the training school officials would get off. So this is how horrendous it is. Now, I talked to one of the 2 parties involved whose home was firebombed, and I wanted to meet him. His wife had met Franklin Camper. He had been to her home. They usually canvass the joints before they bomb your house. And I had a long talk, 2 or 3 hours with him, Mr. Russo, but he didn't come to the house. His wife was afraid. They were afraid of their life, and of course I didn't push it. Joanne Russo is one of the people, not Joanne, but the Russo family were one of the 2 families involved that were firebombed. And you can't pressure people, of course, if they feel in danger. And maybe your instincts were right, because her husband would come see Mae Brussell. And, of course, there's a lot of things that happen in Los Angeles that indicate they know where I am and what I am doing. And so we just talked on the telephone, which also can be tapped. But people that are vicious enough to kill their own daughter to protect this head of the training school in Alabama will do anything to the witnesses whose home was firebombed, who saw Camper at their house. So it is best that they stay in their house and stay protected as much as they can and don't cross over into where Mae Brussell is staying, because they may have a hard way getting home if they ever got home alive. Now, just for the remaining minutes of this particular broadcast, I'll start with the story. The LA Times article, School Owners Hired Mercenaries, Court Paper Says. San Bernardino County, there's a arrest over charges of 2-car fire bombings. Defendants with Franklin Camper in this case are 2 women who own several preschools and elementary schools in Orange County and San Bernardino. The woman saw what they thought was a harassment by former teachers, so they turned to Franklin Camper all the way in Alabama. They didn't take their harassment to the courts. They took it to a man who teaches you how to cut off ears and slice throats and how to set people on fire. And they turned to him in Alabama, and he, instead of saying, hey, I can't do it inside the United States, he hops a plane and comes right out to California. And I will reiterate that over and over as we talk about the camper story. The article goes on, there's a 42-page criminal complaint issued May 20th, 1986, involving an undercover agent who posed as a mercenary training with camper and a four-man mission that went to California. 2 bodyguards who hid in a tree with rifles, 2 women who carried firearms in their purses and the ammunition in their brassieres. Arrested was Charles Ruth Wyckoff and Elizabeth Hamilton, Franklin Joseph Camper, James Cuneo, 22 years old, Paul Hamilton, 42, and William Hedgecorth, 22, who was still out free being sought. The fact that Franklin Camper was out in California is very important. We don't know what purpose he would give this kind of service to these particular teachers. It couldn't just be for money. I'll continue with this next week because we are just short of time, but I think it's one of the most important stories in the country for the implications of what these people do inside the United States, and the excuse of their schools is to train people to go overseas and do these activities while they're doing them right here at home. This is Mae Brussell, and we'll analyze some more of this material. Thank you for your books and letters and calls, and I'll keep in touch with you. If you have any question about the material that I put on the air, I'm listed in the phone book, and you can call and talk it over with me. It's difficult to write about it.